اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين فاطر السماوات والأرضين، ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ومولانا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في القرآن المجيد: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أم خلقوا من غير شيء أم هم الخالقون. صدق الله العلي العظيم. اللهم صل على محمد. My respected brothers and sisters in Iman, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We are continuing our humble gatherings in the remembrance of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein and the family of the Prophet and the Ashab who stood with Imam Hussein on the day of Ashura and beyond. And they understood that there was nothing more valuable than the Iman that was in their hearts. And that Iman billahi subhanahu wa ta'ala led them to be nowhere else except by the side of Abu Abdullah. Even paradise, a guarantee of Jannah, was less valuable to them than to be with Imam Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam on the day of Ashura. And so last week, we discussed how Iman billahi subhanahu wa ta'ala is a type of true and real love, unconditional love, and that it is not bound up in strings. There are no strings attached to your commitment and loyalty and love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then when Allah takes you to the path that will take you to Him, you love that path and you hold on to that path. And that path is a rope that leads you to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا. We don't separate from that rope of God. We don't go anywhere else. With all due respect to those who have different ways and different individuals who they believe are the paths to God, when we discover from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that it is the Ahlul Bayt that are that sirat to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we go nowhere else. Today, inshallah, I want to speak about some more theological and rational discussions about the nature of faith. This is my once a year kalami philosophical lecture, inshallah. So, alhamdulillah, there's not too many of you here to put to sleep. But inshallah, if you'll help me with being patient with me as we go through some of these discussions today, and please do so with the loudest and proudest of your salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Iman billah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a type of commitment and even taklif. We must believe in God. We have to have iman in God. But this iman and this commitment is not something that we have to impose on ourselves as if it is a kind of difficult decision. For in reality, iman is a type of is a natural state of the human soul. The heart naturally moves in the direction of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In the same way that you don't need to convince anyone, go eat food. Well, actually, if there are young children, maybe you do. But eventually, they will give in to their human nature and they'll say, fine, I'll eat the nihari or chalo kebab or maklube, right? Or cheeseburger. Right? They'll eventually eat because that is the natural state of a human being to accept that hunger is part of the human constitution. And eventually, And very naturally, we move in the direction of water because we feel thirsty. And so the human soul naturally turns towards water and seeks it out. It even has a type of faith that out there somewhere, even in the middle of the desert, I go searching for the nourishment that I need. And the same is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The human soul is longing for God. The human soul and the nafs and the ruh is that which wishes to know, where did I come from? What was my origin? What is my purpose? This is why little children are constantly asking questions. Why? 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 Mom and dad, where did I come from? In fact, these lead to very embarrassing discussions at home. But the reality is that this is a question that comes from that very same curiosity. I want to know who made me. I want to know where I have come from. And that is the natural soul. That's the natural state of the human soul. There is a story in the Holy Quran about Nabi Ibrahim. Nabi Ibrahim, of course, he's a great prophet of God, lived a very long life, but many of us don't know about his infanthood. Prophet Ibrahim was born in a difficult time. Just like Prophet Musa, he had around him a number of, I don't know how you say, soothsayers or astrologers or people who would read the signs in the sky. And they read the stars and they came to know that one day there will be some young boy in your nation who will overthrow you or who will undermine your kingdom. So, of course, like every zalim that has ever lived, who thinks they are very powerful and strong, but in reality they are the most insecure of, of men. Maybe you can call them, man children, right? They're kind of so insecure about themselves. So he decides, Nimrud, the tyrant of the time, decides to separate the women from the men, to kill some of the children that are born, if they are boys, or to imprison, or worse, those children that are born. He has this campaign now to try to safeguard his rule. And so the mother of Nabi Ibrahim is worried and is fearful. This is the true mother of Prophet Ibrahim and the true father of Prophet Ibrahim. They are very worried. And so they have no choice. They see that the soldiers are on their way, checking every home. And so the mother of Ibrahim takes the young infant child that has just been born to a cave. And the small little baby, imagine, she just leaves this little child in the cave. But of course, Nabi Ibrahim is not left alone. Nabi Ibrahim is left in the care of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so Allah decides to nourish this child by having milk come out of his thumb. Very naturally, the child looks for the source of his rizq. Right? The way that little children, they turn their neck in the direction of their mother. Right? And so we should not be surprised that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can make milk flow from the thumb of the child. Allah has made milk flow from other places. He can do it wherever He so pleases. And so the little child drinks and is taken care of. And by the way, the Jewish and Christian scripture has a very similar narrative. It's not exactly the same, but it's very similar. When Nabi Ibrahim is 15 months old, he is now strong enough and capable enough that he can walk. This is a child that has been living in the cave for the last year and a half. And now the child looks at the light coming from the distance, and so the child naturally walks in the direction of the light. And now this child, for the first time in his life, sees the outside world and looks to the sky and sees that there's a ball of light, a tiny ball of light in the night sky above him. And so what does the Quran say about this moment when Nabi Ibrahim went out for the first time? This child asks, "Is this my Lord? Is this my God?" And Ibrahim looks up and sees that the star begins to twinkle and begins to kind of dim in and out. You know the way that the stars twinkle in the sky? And immediately the child says, "This cannot be my God." Why? Because that child knows that God is not something that changes or dims or weakens. He knows that his God has to be eternally luminous. And so he goes back into the cave. The next day he comes out again, and this time he sees this large body of luminous light. Before it was covered by the clouds, now he sees that this new white circle in the sky. This is what we call the moon. But he looks at the moon and says, maybe this is my God. But then, of course, he knows that the clouds that are coming in front, blocking its light, he decides, no, this cannot be my God. Because my God cannot be overcome by anything. If my God is to be found, it will not be found in something like this, where it can be covered up. And then the next day he comes out, and this time he sees a large ball of fire in the sky. And then the child says, maybe this is my Lord, this is my God. But then he sees that even though this remarkable ball of fire in the sky, there's nothing in our experience that is more profound and more powerful that we see with our eyes than the sun. But then he sees that the sun begins to set and fade. And he says that my Lord cannot be one that sets or fades or changes, or that its light disappears. And so the child now realizes that I cannot look in the material world. I can't look out there for my God. I have to look inward. I have to realize now that my God, the one whom I decide now to worship, is the one who is eternal, everlasting, all powerful, ever luminous. It has never faded, and he has never gone away or disappeared. And that is whom the fitrah of Nabi Ibrahim calls Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Please recite salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. This story is meant to tell us something about the nature of human beings. That even a little child born in the most separate and remote circumstances away from people, in the heart and the soul of this child, they know that there is an origin for their existence. And they know that that origin cannot be simply the things around that child. Right? In the fitrah of the child, they know that this thing cannot be God, cannot be eternal. Why? Because it was once not here and now it is here, and one day it will be destroyed, it will disappear. There's a study in 2011 that was done. I think it was the largest study of its time by the Oxford Center of Anthropology and Mind. There were 60 academics across many different countries across the world over 3 years. And in that study, they examined the religiosity of people. Now, at the time, it was very in vogue, it was very commonplace to hear these very famous atheists say that religious people are religious because of the indoctrination of their parents. Their parents are prejudiced people, and so they kind of put it in the minds of the children that believe in God or believe in a religion. Right? That you have to kind of trick children into believing it. If you leave them alone, they imagined that they won't believe in God. However, this study found the exact opposite across every culture on earth. Dr. Barrett, Justin Barrett, who was the one who led the study, says that we have gathered a body of evidence that tells us that religion is a common fact of human nature across different societies. This suggests that the attempt to suppress religion is likely to be short-lived. We are born believers. We are born those people who are looking for God. Those people who are atheists are those who they have to teach their children and kind of trick them into following the very natural course of their life and their existence, right? And they even say, and this very same doctor, he says that even those children that were born in remote circumstances, like what you find with Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam, even those naturally came to ask questions about the origin and the creator of their existence. We are people who look above to a higher power for our existence very naturally. Recite salawat, please. And so we have this primordial reality in ourselves. Right? And then those of us who recognize this fitra in ourselves, luckily we don't simply have to believe in the whimsical feelings of us. You know, some people, they say that just because it's natural to believe in God doesn't mean it's true. In reality, I'm going to share this with you right now. Anything that is in your soul and any primordial longing is a sign of the truth of that thing that you long for. When the little child cries after the very first moment that they come out into this world, that cry is for what? That cry is for nourishment. I want food. And that child, in its very existence, understands, if I scream and cry out, I will find the rizq that I need to survive. And it's built in the fitrah. And if you even look at little infants, the way they, even though they can hardly move at all, their neck moves in the direction of their mother. This is not taught to the children. You don't have to have a PowerPoint presentation or a classroom to teach the child, listen, if you want to eat, that this is what you have to do. They know. They come out ready-made. This is the physical aspect of the fitrah. Fitrat Allah, allati fatara nasa alayha. This is how God made you and I. And luckily, we also have an intellect that can confirm the very longings of our soul. That your fitrah is longing for God, your intellect can also confirm some very basic truths. The Quran says, "A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Am khuliqu min ghayri shay." Were they created out of nothing? Am humul khaliqun, or perhaps they are creators. Like even small little children, philosophers or PhD academics, they all understand in their fitrah that we cannot come from nothing. We had to have originated from somewhere. Right? I know that it is in vogue today of some pop culture scientists claiming that we have discovered that things can come from nothing. Right? These so-called pop culture scientists, they're not taken seriously in the field. But Lawrence Krauss, for example, he has a book that's called Something from Nothing, claiming that there's some hypothesis there that maybe there are some examples of particles and things that just pop into existence out of nothing. But when you read what he has to say, you realize that this nothing that he's talking about is actually full of stuff, full of energy and kinetic energy and quantum fluctuations. These are not nothing. We'll talk about how sometimes scientists who are good at science are terrible philosophers and terrible metaphysicians and theologians. But we know in our heart that this is ridiculous, right? You've seen a magician, halal magic, by the way, right? They pull out a bunny from a hat, and what do the children do? They laugh. They smile. Why? Because no, that is ridiculous. That's absurd. That bunny could not have come out of nowhere. And so in their fitrah, they know that there's some trick there. There's some sleight of hand that they don't see, but they know, they have faith that that bunny could not have come from nowhere. Even the smallest little infant. We've done peekaboo with infants, right? We do this kind of thing, peekaboo, peekaboo, and they laugh. The child is actually laughing and finds it comedic because my baba came out of nowhere. Right? It's kind of ridiculous. Nothing comes out of nowhere. How did you do that? Right? But in our fitrah, we understand that the same universe could not have come from nowhere. It must have come from a wajibul wujud, a necessary being who gave it existence. That is the fitrah and that is the intellect. Recite salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And so actually it is the atheists who actually believe in hocus pocus. Right? magic that just came out of the hat. That's where this universe came from. It's absurd. It's kind of very strange how popular culture today has flipped the narrative and made it seem as if this kind of absurd hocus pocus of something coming out of nothing is more reasonable than belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so tonight, inshallah, I want to share with you three shubuhat, three doubts and misgivings that people have that sometimes confuse young people and maybe even old people as well about the belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Help me with the salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. What I just shared with you in the last few minutes is very basic, simple conclusions of kalam. Of course, if you want a more substantial, involved discussion, then you will have to read the books, you'll have to sit with ulama, and you'll have to do the hard work. But the basics can be appreciated by any human being, whether you're a philosopher, a doctor, a millionaire, or a janitor, or a farmer. We're all on the same page. We all have that fitra. We all have that intellect. But one of the shubuhat and confusions that has been in vogue in the Western world especially, but of course it's now everywhere, is this idea of who caused and who made God? Who made Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? This idea has been a common question for quite a long time, but it was popularized by a Western thinker by the name of Bertrand Russell in, I want to say 1920 or so. And in the 1920s, he wrote a very famous, he gave a famous lecture known as Why I Am Not a Christian. And in that lecture, he talks about his youth. And he says that when I was young, I was very convinced by the arguments for the existence of God. That, for example, there cannot be an infinite regress of causes, right? It's called tasalsul, that, the chain of causality across history could not have gone in the past forever. There had to be a beginning point. And if you put dominoes in a row, right? Halal dominoes are haram, by the way. Don't play with them. They're gambling instruments. However, if you have halal dominoes and you place the first one, you will know that they will never fall unless you knock over the first one, right? It's called the infinite regress argument. It's a very simple thing, even children can understand. And so our universe is the same. It had to have began from an original cause. This was very convincing for Bertrand Russell until he read a book by John Stuart Mill. In the 1800s, John Stuart Mill wrote that this idea is all well and good, of belief in the original God that is the cause for all things. But if everything needs a cause, if everything needs a reason, what is the cause of God? What made God? Why is it that believers, this is him talking, why is it that you believers say everything needs a cause, and so you believe in God, but then you never ask the question, who made God? And so Bertrand Russell and John Stuart Mill and these people who are very clever, they said that I don't believe in God because of this. Or in fact, if you want to say God made the world and you want to say that God is the one who doesn't need a cause for some reason because you're prejudiced, then we're just going to say the universe doesn't need a cause. Energy is my God. Right? Vibrations of strings is my God. Material things is my God. The universe is my God. So this is the shubha that they have popularized since about the 1920s and 30s. And even today, if you make the mistake of watching YouTube videos and reading books by these atheists, this is normally the number one reason why they end up not believing in the arguments for God. But we believers, at least from the school of Ahlul Bayt, we explain to them, listen, who told you that everything needs a cause? That's not the case. No one has, at least, again, Muslim philosophers, especially from the school of Ahlul Bayt, they don't say everything needs a cause or everything needs a maker. Only those things that are limited, that are in need, that are existentially weak, That if you look at a tree, for example, you can see that it is limited, it is bounded. One day it was not there and now it is there. It is not absolute. It is not eternal. And so it needs a cause. Limited things need causes. Even me, I'm a limited being. You can draw a picture around me, you can put me in your mind, and you can say there's a border around Azhar Shirazi. There's a limit to him. He is limited, and such limited beings, they are those that need causes. Right? And it just so happens when you look all around the universe, no matter how small they are, no matter how big these material things are, even the galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy is 100,000 light years across. It takes light 100,000 years to get from one side to the other. It's an enormous material thing. But we see that because it's material, because it's limited, it needs a cause. And everything in the material world is like this. But that doesn't mean everything needs a cause. Maybe there's something that is eternal, that is absolute, that is forever, that is unlimited, that is Hayyul Qayyum. If such a being is there, then it would not need a cause. And that is whom we as believers call Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Such a being is not in need. He is ghani. He is needless. Because there's no limit and border and limitation to that God. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is without that need. Right? And so the trees need a cause. We need a cause. Our universe needs a cause to exist. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is needless in this way. Recite salawat, please. Now, I admit that this idea, it's actually very simple to understand. Again, even little children can understand this. However, I admit fully that this being, God Almighty, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is quite bewildering. Why? Because you believe in a being who is forever, meaning he will live forever and will be forever. And that's actually not that difficult to understand. Even you in this room, inshallah, are also going to live forever. You are eternal. You are eternal creatures. Rasulullah has said this to us, that you have not been created for destruction. You have been created not for fana, but you have been created for eternal life. And so inshallah, everyone in this room and all of your loved ones, inshallah, will be living eternally in the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the company of the awliya, Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad, inshallah, in paradise, forever, inshallah, inshallah. Please say Ameen. Recite salawat, please. But Allah is not just like this. Allah is not just abadi. He's not simply going to live forever, but He is also azali, meaning He's always been there. This is what kind of will explode your mind a little bit. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will always be there, and He has always been there. There has never been a period of existence that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wasn't there. Even when there was nothing, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Kuntu kanzan makhfiyan. I was that hidden treasure. There was nothing else except for me. But I wanted to be kareem and generous, and so I created. Allah doesn't need anything. But He wanted to give. He wanted to be generous. He wanted to give existence and gifts and uncountable blessings to things. And so then He created. But Allah has always been there. But this is absolutely, admittedly, astounding and difficult to believe in. That is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most zahir of things, the most obvious of things. Without God, there is nothing. Remember, without pushing that first domino, the rest of the dominoes will not fall. Without God, there is no universe. You cannot even imagine anything without that originator of all things. It's zahir, it's obvious, but at the same time, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that profound mystery. He is that essence that the more you think about Him, the more bewildering you become. Allama Tabatabai in Al-Mizan, he says that the word Allah comes from two words in the Arabic language. Al Ilah. Al means what? The. And then what does ilah mean? Ilah. Believe in yourselves. God. Ahsant. God. The God. But the word ilah etymologically comes from a word that is used to describe bewilderment, confusion, being astounded. That is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He is the one who it is so obvious that He is there. This is what Imam Hussein says when commenting on Dua Arafah. That all these people are looking for you. Where did you go, O Allah, that you have to be looked for and searched for? You don't have to look anywhere. Just turn your heart towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and you will realize everything that you need to realize. But at the same time, when you turn to God and you reflect on His majesty, when you reflect on how He is Hayyul Qayyum, He is ever living, everlasting, He is forever, He is abadi, He is azali, He is unlimited, He is unbounded. When He gives, His treasures do not decrease. We can go on and on and on and on, and we realize how bewildered we truly are, that we know nothing about the haqiqah and the reality of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Recite salawat, please. So nothing is needed. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is independent, does not need a cause or a maker or any reason other than His own essence. A second shubha, which you often hear, is this question of, for example, if God is truly omnipotent, if He is truly all-powerful, as you believers say, then can God make a rock so big that even God cannot lift it? Can God do something such that then He becomes unable to do anything afterwards? Another example is, can God make another God? If Allah is omnipotent, then why can't He do that? How do we answer this question? In Islam, and in the correct conception of Tawheed, we believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala huwa qadirun ala kulli shay. He is powerful over all things. There is no incapacity in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's not even a single fraction of weakness in Allah Azza wa Jal. Allah can do everything. He has every power, every ability. There's nothing that stops Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If He wishes for it to be, it will be. The problem is this: you and I and all of creation, we are incapable. And so if Allah decides, and by the way, this is a rule in theology, you should memorize it. If you are capable of a kamal and a perfection, Allah will give it to you without even any question. If you are capable of receiving hidayah, Allah will give it to you. If you're capable of being a prophet of God, Allah will give it to you. If you are incapable of having a child, there's something missing in you, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will withhold it, and with hikmah, with wisdom. There's reason for that. But the point is that Allah is all generous. If something can receive any amount of kamal and perfection, Allah will give it to you. The problem is this: Allah could theoretically give so much power, maybe even infinite power to creation. The problem is that creation cannot accept the power of God. Creation is incapable. Let me give you an example. Have you seen a cup of water? Of course you have. Have you ever seen the ocean fit inside this cup? Never. Why? Because this cup is incapable of receiving the majesty of the ocean. How absurd would it be if you go to the ocean and say, "Ocean, oh, you're so weak, you can't fit into this cup. What's wrong with you?" The ocean will laugh at you and say, "What are you talking about?" Right? Have you seen how enormous I am? It is this cup which is incapable of receiving me. Right? I am still majestic. I am still as enormous as I always have been. Imagine there's the world's greatest artist, and she can paint the most beautiful and amazing paintings. And then you go to that artist and you tell her, "I want you to paint me a picture. I'll pay you a lot of money, But the only catch is I want you to paint this painting on the wind. Paint it on the air. The artist will say, what's wrong with you? Are you okay? It's not that my abilities are lacking. It's because the wind is not capable of being my canvas. It's not a weakness in the artist, it's not a deficiency in the ocean, but it is a deficiency in the receiver. It's a deficiency in you and me. So if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wished to create such a rock, go ahead, Allah will do it. And what will happen to that rock? It will shatter into pieces. There's a story in the Quran about Nabi Musa alayhi salatu wasalam. Nabi Musa is invited by God to a miqat for 30 days plus 10. Remember, it is a sunnah of God that sometimes He loves His awliya so much that He extends His invitation. Sometimes this happens. And so don't be surprised if sometimes the return of our Imam is the same way. Right? Sometimes Allah needs to spend more time with His wali, privately, alone. Right? And in fact, this is, as a side note, this idea of the ghaiba is found throughout the Holy Quran. That sometimes Allah has to extend that ghaiba for some time. Inshallah, we'll talk about that some other time. Prophet Musa is now speaking with God for 30 plus 10 nights. For a total of how many nights? 40. Eventually, Prophet Musa is so enamored with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, oh Allah, show yourself to me. Let me see you. Now, of course, Nabi Musa is not asking to see Allah with his eyes. That is not possible. The eyes are limited. They're incapable of seeing God. But what he's asking for is a type of hudurul qalb. Let me see you with my heart. This is what Ahlul Bayt teach us, that on the Day of Judgment, we will see Allah. Not with our eyes, not with our material senses, but with our heart and our souls, we will witness Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is also, of course, what Rasulullah witnessed in the Mi'raj. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to Prophet Musa, I'm going to do tajalli. I'm going to show myself to the mountain. If when I show myself to the mountain, if it remains in its place, know that you will be able to see me. The Quran says, فَلَمَّا تَجَلَّى رَبُّهُ لِلْجَبَلِ جَعَلَهُ دَكَّا. When Allah did tajalli upon the mountain, what happened to that mountain? What happened? It shattered into pieces. Now, would we say, oh God, you're not strong enough to reveal yourself to the mountain? Na'udhu billah. It's an absurdity. It's ridiculous. Even the greatest of God's creation cannot experience that manifestation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The only one, of course, who could experience as much of the tajalliyat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Prophet Musa, I didn't tell you the end of the story, he fainted. When he saw that mountain shatter to pieces, he swooned, he fainted. And when he woke up, he said, Subhanallah, I am incapable of receiving even that level of your tajalli. Now compare this to Prophet Muhammad, who on the Mi'raj came face to face with God. فَكَانَ قَابَ قَوْسَيْنِ أَوْ أَدْنَى. Face to face with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now this was not easy for our Prophet. It was difficult. And so when Rasulullah saw that his Habib Muhammad was having a difficult time, he decides, let me do something to comfort my beloved one Muhammad. Let me speak to him in the language and in the voice of someone who will give him comfort and sakina. And so he spoke to him in the voice of Ali ibn Abi Talib. alayhi salam. Ya Ali, sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And so it is the incapacity in creation that cannot receive the power of God. This is why Amir al-Mu'mineen was asked a very similar question. Recite salawat, please. His question was actually a little different. Someone asked him, can God make another God? Sharikul Bari. And Amir al-Mu'mineen, he responded to him saying, Allati sa'altani la yakunu. What you have asked God to do is to ask him to do nothing at all. because you've asked something absurd. It's ridiculous, right? Because such a being cannot exist. I promise you, if it could, Allah would do it. Allah is all generous. But the problem is you. There cannot be another God. It's incapable of receiving such a status. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in His greatness, that greatness is not transferable to anything else. It is as if you said, oh Allah, can you do blah, 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 blah. You asked nothing at all. Some things in creation are weak. That's all of us. All of us are fuqara ilallah. Ya ayyuhan nas antumul fuqara. It is you who are dependent, weak, impoverished. But impossible things, illogical things, are the weakest of all. They are so weak that they cannot even smell the fragrance of existence. And so that is the second shubha. Recite salawat ala Muhammad wa All right. The third and final shubha is the sad reality of religiosity in our society, in which we imagine that God is a man, a bearded man in the sky. If you read the books by some of these atheists, it's constantly the silliness, and I don't blame them. Okay, this is the one critique I will have for today, inshallah, that constantly people are being taught that God is a man, that God is a person. Okay, and this has a terrible impact on the religiosity of people, because they realize that they think that God is just a bigger man in the sky, and that type of absurdity turns people off from religion. There was a debate I was watching between this famous atheist, Richard Dawkins, and a very renowned scientist by the name of Francis Collins. Francis Collins was the director of the Human Genome Project, excuse me. And so I forget when it was, 2011, 2013. They had finished mapping the genome sequence of DNA in a human being. And so all 3.2 billion base pairs, that genetic code in a human being, they had finally mapped it out. Right? If you and I were to try to count every single letter and write it out, it would take us 70 years to finish. But this project finally finished this enormous task. Francis Collins, he was a believer in God. He was an atheist, but when he entered into the scientific field and he researched and he studied, he realized that there's no way there cannot be any God to create all of this wisdom that we find, this remarkable harmony, these profound scientific realities that we see. And so he was arguing with Dawkins about the existence of God. And so one of the points that he brought up, listen very carefully, it's going to get a little scientific, forgive me. One of the points he brought up, what is called fine-tuning. The fine-tuning principle. What does this mean? It is observed in science today, and it's a very uncanny, remarkable thing that everyone in the field, atheist or believer or Muslim or Christian or whatever you are, it is a kind of very remarkable thing that they find. That the laws of this universe are very, very precise. The laws of physics, the laws of cosmology are incredibly precise. How precise? One example is what is known as the expansion rate of the universe. Okay, you've heard of the Big Bang before? What they have observed, and this is why they believe in the Big Bang, is because they've noticed that everything is flying away from each other. So our galaxy and the neighboring galaxy, we're getting farther and farther apart from each other. Why? Because the universe is expanding. Even the Quran seems to imply this as well, that there's a type of expansion of the material world. But what they've noticed is that this expansion rate is defined by what is known as the cosmological constant. Okay, bear with me. And that number is extremely precise. It has to be so precise that it is as if someone fine-tuned it to be exactly where it is. How precise is it? It is that if you change this number by 0.00000 and write 120 zeros, and then at the end there's a 2, if you change that to a 1 or a 3, the universe collapses on itself. Or there will be no formation of galaxies and stars, and there'll be no inertia. Okay. How precise is that number? 1 times 10 to the negative 120th power. How precise is that number? That if you change it even that tiny amount. There's a professor by the name of Paul Davies that I read his book recently, and he gave the example. This number is so precise and so accurate that to reach that accuracy, you have to take a gun, a halal gun, right? For anyone who's listening. And you take that gun and you shoot a bullet from here, and across the observable universe, there is a penny. Now remember, our galaxy is called the Milky Way galaxy. It is 100,000 light years across. It means it takes light, the fastest thing that we know of, the fastest material thing, I guess you could know of. It takes light 100,000 years to cross the Milky Way galaxy. And this one galaxy is like not even a grain of sand in the entire cosmos of the observable universe. Now, take that penny on the other side of the universe, and you shoot that gun and you hit that target with that bullet. That is how precise this number truly is. That if it's slightly off, you'll miss the target. Right? Now, Richard Dawkins, this is the important part. He said something very interesting. He said, you know what? That is a good argument for the existence of God. He admitted that there was something kind of compelling about this. You know what he said? He said, I just can't believe it. Because how can I believe in a man in the sky? Like, how can I pray to someone who's talking to me? But who told you this is God? I mean, we know who told him that God is a man, but sadly, this is the misunderstanding that we have of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Quran clarifies this so many times. Laysa kamithlihi shay. Allah is not like anything. Nothing is like him. No even remote resemblance is there to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Qul huwa Allahu ahad. Allah hus samad. Lam yalid wa lam yulad wa lam yakul lahu kufuwan ahad. There's nothing like God. There's nothing similar to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam, he was asked about the meaning of Allahu Akbar. What does Allahu Akbar mean? God is great. God is the greatest. The Imam says that don't misunderstand. This Allahu Akbar doesn't simply mean that God is the greatest of things. It's not that there's some big thing out there and God is just bigger than that thing. That is not what Allahu Akbar means. Allahu Akbar means anything that could be, anything that your mind can conjure up and imagine. A galaxy that is triple the size of the universe as we know it. 100 times, infinitely much larger than the universe. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is absolutely, unbelievably, infinitely greater than even these things that we can even conjure up in our mind. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is beyond, He is muta'ali. And that is why the only one in this entire universe who deserves to be arrogant and mutakabbir is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You know, when you're on the court on basketball, there's some people who deserve to talk trash, right? You know what I'm talking about? Because they're just that good, right? I'm not going to name any names. Hakeem Olajuwon, right? Well, he's a Muslim one, I guess. But they can only talk that kind of arrogant talk when you really are that good, right? Muhammad Ali, for example, is a good example, right? He used this big talk to prop up Black Americans in America, to show that, you know, we have dignity, we have honor. And even the Ahlul Bayt, they teach us that when you're facing against the zalim, speak arrogantly against that zalim. Be arrogant. See, who are you? You are nobody. Look at Lady Zainab, salamullahi alayha, right? Who are you, Yazid, that you think you've destroyed our memory? Where will you be? No one will care about you. But the Ahlul Bayt will be raised to stations and heights that even no one can even imagine. This is what the Quran speaks about, the A'raf. There are these heights in which the Shuhada and the Awliya will reach, that people will look even of paradise. They will look up and they will see, we cannot even imagine being at that station. Hazrat Abbas, the Shuhada are lined up on the Day of Judgment, and they're all kind of very happy and excited and talking about all of that they did for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then they will look up with ghibba, with envy. And they will say, my goodness, who is that shining up at that station that none of us can even reach at all? And a caller will call out. Even people will not even deserve to speak his name. This is Abbas Alamdar, the brother of Hussein, who gave his life on the day of Ashura. Recite salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. I will end with this. We are people of knowledge. We are people of science. There is so many books you can read that can show you that it was Islamic civilization that has led to what we see in modern science today. Maybe one day we'll talk about that. And it was Muslim scientists who were doing the hard work of science and laying the foundation. Ibn al-Haytham, for example, right? Jabir ibn al-Hayyan. It is said that he was a student of Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq in his books on we call him, we call algebra today, right? Al-Jabr, right? That these individuals, they paved the way. We are not anti-science by any means, but we need to understand, and our young people especially. I wish there were more here to understand this. So many young people today, they go to universities and they hear this big talk, kind of loose language, very irresponsible people speaking about that there's no God or we don't like religion. Right? This is what I heard so much, even in my school in Texas, where I went to engineering school. Right? But we need to understand that we can respect scientists for their science, right? And maybe even we respect and we honor them with the awards that they may win, the Nobel prizes that they may get. That's all fine and good. But we have to be intelligent and understand that when these scientists start speaking about things that they don't know and don't understand, you need to understand that their criticisms have no weight at all. They need to know their lane. They need to understand their limitations. And many of these popular culture scientists today are making this mistake. They speak very smartly about their scientific enterprise, but then they start talking about religion, theology, politics, and they sound like children. They make mistakes that even philosophy 101 students in college or maybe in high school or less than that would not make the mistakes that they are making. There was an anecdote in the life of Albert Einstein, the most famous modern scientist that we know of. And he used to say that I believe in the God of Spinoza. Spinoza was a Jewish philosopher, and he had a certain way of talking about God. And we're not going to argue whether it was right or wrong, but he used to say, I believe in that. And so then eventually people asked him, can you tell us and talk to us and have a lecture about the God of Spinoza and tell us what he believes and help us understand this? And Albert Einstein did something that I think is respectable, and we should admire him for this. It shows that he was a wise person. He said, I admire and I believe in what Spinoza has to say, but I'm not an expert in what Spinoza has to say. I'm not a theologian. I'm not a philosopher. I'm a scientist. Right? And so call someone who is an expert in that field. And so this is the most renowned scientist of the day, of our modern time, but understands his own limitation. And so if you're going to hear any criticisms, let's at least ensure that these people have studied it and know what they're talking about. Please recite salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. One more salawat, please. There's another shubha that we can talk about, and that is, should we cry really for Imam Hussein? Maybe we should celebrate. Maybe we should laugh and be joyous and have parades. Why? This is a misunderstanding. This is incorrect, but I actually don't blame them. For certainly on the day of Ashura and beyond, there are many tragedies. There are many terrible, horrendous events that break the heart, that shatter the souls, that bring tears to the eyes. But there are also great acts of triumph that when you hear them, it makes you proud. You see On the night of Ashura, there were some of the companions, they were joking and laughing. And when they were asked, why are you joking and why are you laughing? They say that, how can we not be happy? Tomorrow we're going to give our lives for Hussein. And we're going to be in the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How can we not be happy? When you hear these stories and you admire how fearless, how much faith these men and these women and even these children had. You look at Imam Hussein, and the enemy narrates that we have never seen anyone who had lost everything, whose men were killed in front of his eyes, whose sons had been martyred, who was so hungry and who was so thirsty. But yet when he came to the battlefield, he came at us like a lion. He fought so valiantly, he fought so ferociously, that when he flashed Zulfiqar at us, it was like lightning. Imam Hussein, it is said, went to the Furat, and he looked at the body of Abbas there, and he says, oh Abbas, do you see how your master fights on this day? Do you think it is only you, O Abbas, who can scatter the enemy? When you hear these stories, maybe you do want to cheer, you want to be proud. But I promise you, my brothers and sisters, come now to the night of the 11th of Muharram, and I promise you, there's nothing to cheer for. There's nothing to be happy about. The suffering that you see in the tent of Imam Hussein alayhi salatu wassalam was something that our Imam worried about so much. It is said that when Imam Hussein was lying on the plains of Karbala and he could no longer move because his body was filled with arrows, because he had lost so much blood, that he was so thirsty. Imam Hussein, now understand, my brothers and sisters, Shimr is now walking towards the body of Imam Hussein. But Imam Mahdi and Ziyad Nahiya does not say that the Imam was looking at Shimr. Imam Mahdi, he recites that out of the corner of the Imam's eye, the Imam is looking not towards Shimr, but to the tents of the women and the children. That our Imam was so dreadfully worried. What will my Sakina do after I leave this world? What will Rabab do? What will Layla do? What will Zainab do after I am made a shaheed? This is what Imam Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam is worried about on the day of Ashura. Gharib Hussein, the ghurba of the camp of Imam Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam, has not left anything but sadness and grief in our hearts, brothers and sisters. Our Imam was not alive to witness that when Zuljana came back to the tents, Sakina and Zainab and the women, they see that Zuljana has now returned without his rider. They hold on to the legs of Zuljana. They fall upon the body of Zuljana. They're holding on to the mane of the horse of Imam Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam. And now Lady Sakina comes, a 4-year-old child. And she says, oh Zuljana, when they killed my father, did they at least give him something to drink before he died? Did they give him a sip of water? Now the order came, something that Imam Hussein was more worried about than anything, that when the little children and the women were now hiding in the tents, when they had ripped off their scarves, they came into the tents, and so Umar ibn Sa'd ordered that the tents be burned. Brothers and sisters, what was it like to see the tents of Imam Hussein burned on the 11th of Muharram? It is said that Imam Sajjad was holding a tasbih in his hand. In his hand there was the sibha, and it fell to the ground. And when it fell to the ground, the beads scattered in every direction. Imam Sajjad began to weep so loudly. They asked him, oh Imam, what has happened? We will get you another sibha. We will get you another tasbih. He says, do you not know that these beads scattered the same way that the children scattered on the night of the 11th of Muharram? Sakina now goes into the desert, all alone. It is said that Humayd ibn Muslim is watching this little girl as she comes now and she bumps into a man. This man was named Shimr ibn al-Joshan. What more can this cursed man do to the family of the Prophet? He takes this little child, slaps the little child, rips off the earrings of the little child. Now she runs into the darkness of Karbala. Brothers and sisters, Humayd ibn Muslim narrates that I came to the little girl who had fire on her clothes. She was running away. I came to help her. The child said, "Get away from me, old man. Do you not know that we are the family of the Prophet? Do you not know that we are honorable people?" Humayd said, "Little girl, I'm not here to harm you. I'm here to help you." Sakina has not seen kindness with anyone but her own Ahlul Bayt for so long. But she says, "Oh Shaykh, if you have any kindness in your heart, can you do me one favor? Can you show me towards Kufa? Can you show me the direction towards Najaf?" Humayd says, "Oh little girl, Najaf is very far from here. What do you wish to do in Najaf?" Sakina says, "I want to go to my grandfather. I want to go and complain to my grandfather, Amirul Mu'mineen. And look what they did to my Baba Hussein." Brothers and sisters, Imam Sajjad, on his way back from Sham, he stops in Karbala. In Karbala, he meets with Jabir ibn Abdullah al-Ansari. Jabir was a blind man at this point in his life. And so look and see how Imam Sajjad holds on to the hand of Jabir. He takes him and he says, "Look, Jabir, this is where my cousin Qasim fell to the ground and they trampled him while he was still alive. This is where Ali Akbar, my brother, he fell and they tore his body to pieces. This is where Ali Asghar was buried." Imam Sajjad is doing his best to describe to Jabir, the great companion of Rasulullah, what happened on the day of Ashura until he came to a hill. He came to a place where that was elevated. And how did he describe what took place on this hill? Brothers and sisters, Imam Sajjad says that this is where my aunt Zainab stood as she was watching. What was she seeing? Brothers and sisters, it is said that on the night of Ashura, before the day of Ashura took place, Imam Hussein showed his companions what would happen to them and how they would give their lives in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Brothers and sisters, they all saw how they were to die. Then they asked the Imam, "Can you show us how you will give your life, O our Imam?" Imam Hussein said, "I want to show you, but you will not be able to bear what you see." Brothers and sisters, but what about Zainab, salamullahi alayha? When she stands until Zainabi, she is watching that Imam Hussein, her brother, is now lying on the sands of Karbala. Shimar ibn al-Joshan will sit on the chest of Hussein. He will take the dagger in his arms. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Wa saya'lamu alladhina zalamu wa yam munqalib yanqalibun. Matim Hussein, Ya Hussein.